"Hey, you!" he barked, his voice slicing through the night. "Stop right there. Let's see some ID." The summer air in Atlanta hung thick with humidity, but the tension was heavier still. On a crowded street corner, flashing blue lights cut through the dusk, painting faces in harsh strokes of red and blue. People slowed their steps, phones half raised, waiting to see what drama was about to unfold. Officer Mark Henderson adjusted his belt, the swagger in his stride deliberate, almost theatrical. He had chosen his target carefully, a black woman in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp suit, briefcase in hand, walking home after a long day. To him, she wasn't a professional or a leader or even a neighbor. She was simply someone to dominate in front of an audience. "Hey, you!" he barked, his voice slicing through the night. "Stop right there. Let's see some ID." The woman froze. Danielle Carter. Her heart clenched, not in fear but in fury, though she masked it with practiced calm. She knew exactly what was happening. Henderson wasn't enforcing the law. He was performing. Around them, the crowd grew restless. Someone whispered, "Why her?" Another muttered, "Here we go again." Henderson smirked, sensing his stage. He gestured for her bag. "What's in here? Drugs? Stolen goods?" His words dripped with casual cruelty, designed to strip dignity in public view. Danielle's fingers tightened around her briefcase. Inside her, two battles raged. The professional restraint of a leader and the raw humiliation of being reduced, yet again, to a stereotype. The stares, the murmurs, the quiet laughter from the sidelines pressed against her like invisible weights. And then, as Henderson leaned closer, sneering, Danielle lifted her gaze. Her eyes locked onto his with a calm so unnerving it froze him mid-sentence. She spoke softly, almost like a warning. "Officer Henderson, you really don't know who I am, do you?" The crowd hushed. Henderson's smirk faltered, but this was only the beginning. Long before Danielle Carter ever wore a badge, she learned that her skin color came with invisible handcuffs. She was 8 the first time she saw her father pulled over for driving suspiciously in their own neighborhood. It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind meant for pancakes and cartoons, but instead she sat in the back seat watching a police officer press her father against their car hood. The man's voice was cold and clinical, as if he were reading from a script. "Step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them," her father complied, jaw tight, dignity fraying. Danielle's mother kept whispering, "Don't say anything. Just let it go." But Danielle didn't understand. Her dad was a teacher, a good man. Why were they treating him like a criminal? Later that night, he knelt beside her bed. "Some people," he said, voice heavy, "will see your skin before they see your soul. But that doesn't mean you hide. It means you stand taller." Those words carved themselves into her bones. And from that night on, Danielle vowed that one day she'd wear the uniform, not as a symbol of power, but as a shield for those who needed one. But dreams, she would learn, were much heavier for people like her. The police academy smelled like sweat and asphalt, a factory of discipline and authority. Danielle was one of only 3 black women in her class. From the very first roll call, the stares said more than the instructors did. "Carter," a drill sergeant barked. "You here to make a difference or to make a statement?" "Both, sir," she answered, trying to sound stronger than she felt. He smirked. "We'll see." Training was grueling. She excelled in physical drills, shot higher scores in firearm accuracy, and outperformed many male recruits in crisis simulations. Yet praise was rare. Instead, comments like, "You're pretty articulate for someone from that background," or, "I didn't expect you to handle pressure so well," followed her wherever she went. One night, after lights out, she overheard 2 classmates laughing in the hallway. "Carter's probably here for the diversity quota," one said. "Yeah," the other chuckled. "Let's hope she can actually shoot straight." She clenched her fists under the covers, swallowing the rage. Prove them wrong, she told herself. Prove them all wrong, and she did. She graduated top 10 in her class. But when the assignments came in, Danielle was quietly sent to one of the toughest precincts. At the same time, her less qualified peers were placed in safer, more prestigious districts. It was no accident. It never was. 15 years later, Danielle had seen it all and survived it all. Domestic disputes that spiraled into violence, innocent kids handcuffed for matching a description, promotions she'd earned but didn't receive. Inside the department, respect was a currency she was never given freely. Her reports were double-checked. Her recommendations were ignored. Meetings would pause when she walked in, then resume as if her voice didn't matter. One morning, she arrived early for a briefing. On the whiteboard was a list of commendations from a recent high-profile drug bust. She had led the operation, coordinated surveillance, planned the takedown, even negotiated the surrender. Yet her name wasn't on the list. Clerical error, her supervisor muttered when she asked. But the smirk on his face told the truth. They had erased her contribution on purpose. Later that day, she overheard a rookie whispering, "She's good." But let's be honest, she probably got the job to check a box. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her badge. It felt heavier than usual, as if every ounce of authority it carried was counterweighted by the prejudice it couldn't erase. "Why do I keep doing this?" she whispered to herself. "Why do I keep believing this system can change?" But then she thought of the kids she'd helped, the families she'd protected, the small, quiet victories that never made the news. That's why. And so, she stayed. When the captain of her precinct retired unexpectedly, Danielle almost didn't apply. She was tired, not physically, but soul-tired. The kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones and whispers, "Why keep trying when they'll never see you?" But her mentor, a retired deputy chief named Harold Benson, refused to let her quit. "You've spent your whole career fighting from the bottom," he told her. "It's time to fight from the top." The selection process was brutal. Interviews, performance reviews, leadership assessments. Rumors swirled that the department had already chosen someone else, Lieutenant Greg Sanders, a white officer with far less experience but plenty of connections. When the announcement came, Danielle sat in her car for 5 full minutes, too stunned to move. "Congratulations, Captain Carter," the email read. The news spread fast. Most of her colleagues offered forced smiles and stiff handshakes. Others didn't bother hiding their resentment. And then there were a few. People like Maria Lopez, a young Latina officer who saw Danielle as proof that the system could evolve. "You did it," Maria said, hugging her tightly. "You're going to change this place." But Danielle knew the truth. A promotion wasn't a finish line. It was a battlefield with a better view. Mark Henderson had been with the force for nearly 2 decades. He prided himself on being old school, a phrase he used to justify his disdain for political correctness and woke policing. Behind closed doors, he complained about affirmative action and unqualified hires. On the streets, he made it a point to assert his authority, especially over black and brown citizens, and yet the department loved him. He closed cases, filed paperwork on time, and never caused official trouble. As long as the complaints never stuck, Henderson's record remained spotless. But deep down, he knew the landscape was changing. Younger officers were more progressive. Community groups were louder. And now, rumors of a black woman captain swirled through the hallways, a concept he found laughable. "Can you imagine that?" he told a colleague one night at the bar. "Answering to someone like her?" No way. The universe, it seemed, was preparing a lesson for Mark Henderson, one that would strip away every ounce of his false confidence and expose the rot beneath his badge. On the night he stopped Danielle Carter on that street corner, Mark Henderson thought he was teaching a lesson. He believed he was putting someone in their place. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his career, his reputation, and the carefully constructed illusion of power he had built over 20 years were about to collapse. And it would happen not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but right there on the pavement, under the gaze of the people he once dismissed. The night after the incident, Atlanta's streets buzzed with the usual weekend energy, music from passing cars, laughter spilling from bars. But Danielle Carter's apartment was silent. Too silent. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her work clothes, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The same uniform she had worn with pride now felt like a costume, a symbol that meant nothing to the man who had humiliated her in public. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Her words echoed in her mind. She had delivered them with icy control, but beneath that composure was a storm, rage, embarrassment, and worst of all, doubt. If 20 years of service, spotless conduct, and leadership meant nothing to someone like Henderson, what hope was there for the system as a whole? A soft buzz pulled her from her thoughts. A text from Maria Lopez. "Saw the video. It's already on social media. We need to talk now," Danielle sighed. She had hoped the incident would remain contained. But in an era where every injustice is a hashtag away from a movement, it was naive to think otherwise. Maria arrived 20 minutes later, still in uniform, eyes wide with concern. She didn't speak at first, just wrapped Danielle in a fierce hug. "I can't believe he did that," she said, voice trembling with anger. "To you." "He didn't know who I was," Danielle replied quietly. "And that's the point. To him, I wasn't a captain. I wasn't a veteran. I was just another black woman he could push around." Maria paced the living room, shaking her head. "You could report him. Hell, you should report him." Danielle's laugh was bitter. "And what happens next? Internal Affairs slaps him on the wrist? They circle the wagons, protect their own, and I'm the one labeled emotional or difficult." Maria stopped pacing. "Then we don't go through channels." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "Change the culture from the inside. You're the captain now, that means you have leverage. Use it!" The idea landed like a spark in dry grass. For weeks, Danielle had been planning routine operational adjustments, training updates, new patrol protocols. But Maria was talking about something far bigger, a systemic overhaul. "You're talking about rewriting the rules," Danielle said. "Exactly," Maria replied. "Because the ones we have are built to protect people like him. They worked through the night." Coffee cups multiplied on the table. Notes filled page after page. By dawn, they had the skeleton of a strategy, bold, risky, and guaranteed to make enemies. Step 1. Introduce a new accountability framework, mandatory body camera audits, expanded civilian oversight, and a bias response team with disciplinary power. Step 2. Launch comprehensive anti-bias training. Not the checkbox kind, but immersive simulations and scenario-based programs that expose real patterns of prejudice. Step 3. Public transparency. Monthly data releases on traffic stops, use of force incidents, and complaint outcomes. It's ambitious, Maria admitted as sunlight crept through the blinds. "It's necessary," Danielle replied. "If they're going to see me as a stereotype, I'll make sure the system itself isn't one." But even as they planned, Danielle knew the risks. This wasn't just about policy. It was about power. And power doesn't surrender quietly. 2 days later, Danielle called a closed-door meeting with the precinct's senior officers. The atmosphere was icy before she even entered the room. Henderson sat near the front, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "I've reviewed our internal data and external feedback. There are serious gaps in how we serve this community, gaps that erode trust and put all of us at risk. That ends now." A murmur rippled through the room. Danielle clicked to the first slide of her presentation, a stark chart showing disproportionate stops of black drivers. "This is not a talking point," she said. "It's a failure, and we're going to fix it." Halfway through, the interruptions began. "With all due respect, Captain," one sergeant said, "are we implying the department is racist?" "I'm stating that our outcomes are," Danielle replied coolly. Henderson raised his hand, feigning politeness. "So, let me get this straight. We do our jobs, follow procedures, and now we're the problem?" "No," Danielle said. "The system is the problem, and systems are built by people, which means people can change them." The meeting ended with thin smiles and tighter jaws. By afternoon, rumors were spreading like wildfire. "She's trying to make us look bad." She's playing the race card. She's not one of us. And then came the memo. It arrived anonymously in her inbox late one evening. A scanned internal report from 5 years earlier. It documented a series of complaints against Henderson. Racial profiling, verbal abuse, and even a use of force incident swept under the rug. All marked unsubstantiated. But the final page was worse. An email chain showing senior leadership had deliberately buried the findings to protect department reputation. Danielle felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just about Henderson. It was the entire system shielding him. And now she had proof. Maria stared at the screen in disbelief. "This is explosive. It's dangerous," Danielle countered. "If they know I have this, they'll come for me. Then we use it strategically, quietly. This isn't just about reform anymore. This is about exposing the rot." Over the next few weeks, Danielle moved carefully. She reached out to officers she trusted, Black, Latino, Asian, and even a few white colleagues disillusioned with the status quo. Small meetings over coffee turned into late-night strategy sessions. Not everyone was willing to stand with her. One veteran officer, once a friend, pulled her aside in the hallway. "Danielle," he whispered, glancing around, "I agree with you, but you're poking a hornet's nest. Guys like Henderson, they will retaliate. Are you ready for that?" "I'm not ready," she admitted, "but I'm willing." By the end of the month, she had a quiet coalition, enough to support her reforms publicly and withstand the initial wave of resistance. Still, the threats began to surface. A note slipped into her locker. "Know your place." An anonymous email. "Careers have ended for less." The fear was real, but so was the resolve. It happened during what should have been a routine briefing. Danielle presented her updated accountability plan to a city oversight committee. Everything was going smoothly, until one of her own officers stood up and accused her of sowing division and undermining morale. It was Lieutenant Sanders, the same man she had once mentored. "Captain Carter is more interested in political theater than real policing," he told the committee. "Her plan will tie our hands and put this city at risk." The room buzzed with murmurs. Cameras clicked. The narrative was shifting, and not in her favor. That night, Danielle sat in her office long after everyone had left. The city skyline glowed in the distance, indifferent to her struggle. Maybe they're right, she thought. Maybe I'm pushing too hard, too fast. But then she remembered her father's words. "Stand taller." And she knew. This was precisely what they wanted. They wanted her tired, defeated, compliant. She wasn't giving them that satisfaction. A week later, Danielle called a press conference, something she had sworn she wouldn't do until her reforms were ready. But circumstances had changed. The fight was no longer about internal policy. It was about public accountability. Standing before a sea of microphones and flashing cameras, she spoke with calm precision. "This department has done incredible work to protect this city. But it has also failed. Failed to protect all citizens equally, failed to hold itself accountable, and failed to confront the biases that still exist within its ranks." "That ends today," gasps rippled through the crowd. Journalists fired questions. Danielle answered each one firmly, unapologetically. And then she dropped the bombshell. "We will be conducting a full internal audit, in collaboration with independent investigators and community leaders. No officer, regardless of rank or tenure, is above scrutiny." It was a declaration of war, not on individuals but on the system itself. And everyone in that room knew it. The backlash was immediate. The police union condemned her. Anonymous leaks painted her as divisive and dangerous. A few city council members called for her resignation. But something else was happening, too. Community. Leaders reached out to offer support. Activist groups mobilized in her defense. And among the rank and file, whispers of quiet admiration began to circulate. "Maybe she's right," one officer said in the locker room. "She's got guts," another replied. "I'll give her that." And in one corner of the precinct, Mark Henderson sat alone, reading the memo she had circulated internally, a memo that hinted, without naming names, at buried misconduct cases. For the first time in his career, he felt something foreign tighten in his chest. Fear. The storm was coming. And this time, it wasn't Danielle who would be on the defensive. The morning of the precinct's public accountability forum dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day where the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. The city council had demanded answers. The community wanted blood. And inside the downtown civic center, every seat was filled. Reporters jostled for position. Cameras hummed. Residents clutching signs, justice for all and no more silence, lined the walls. And in the center of it all, under the harsh white glow of the stage lights, Captain Danielle Carter adjusted the microphone. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "Today isn't about individuals. It's about accountability. For our department, for our city, and for the system we've all built. But of course, everyone knew this wasn't just about the system. This was about Mark Henderson. He sat 2 rows back, arms crossed, face a mask of contempt. In his mind, this was nothing more than a political circus, a chance for Carter to grandstand. He'd weathered worse storms, and he still had allies. The Union was behind him. The old guard whispered their support. "She won't touch me," he thought. "Not here. Not like this." Danielle clicked a remote and the screen behind her lit up with data, stop and frisk patterns, arrest disparities, complaint records. It was damning. In the last 5 years, she said, black drivers in this precinct were stopped at a rate 3.7 times higher than white drivers, despite lower contraband discovery rates. That's not enforcement. That's bias. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Henderson rolled his eyes. Statistics, always statistics. And yet, Danielle continued, complaints about racial profiling are rarely sustained. Why? Because the oversight process is broken. Intentionally so. That got louder reactions. A city council member shifted uncomfortably. Henderson's jaw tightened. Then Danielle paused. "Let me show you an example." She clicked again. A new slide appeared, a redacted internal memo dated 5 years earlier. Even from the back row, Henderson recognized it instantly. His pulse spiked. "This document," Danielle said, "details repeated complaints against a senior officer, all marked unsubstantiated, yet the final page shows correspondence between leadership, deliberately burying the investigation." Gasps. Cameras flashed. Henderson's throat felt dry. "And I have here," she said, holding up a folder, "the original version, unredacted." The room exploded. Journalists shouted questions. Community leaders demanded names. "Captain Carter," one reporter yelled. "Are you saying officers are being protected after misconduct?" "Yes," Danielle said simply. "And one of them is in this room." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henderson's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew she couldn't name him, not without ironclad evidence. And the department would protect him. They always had. Then Danielle smiled. Not the warm, reassuring smile she was known for, but something colder. "Calculated. Before we continue," she said, "I'd like to run a live demonstration of the new bias simulation tool we're implementing." Several officers volunteered for this pilot program. "Officer Henderson, would you join us?" The room turned. Henderson blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Danielle said. "You were one of our most experienced field officers. Your participation would be invaluable." Trapped. Declining would make him look guilty. Accepting could be worse. He forced a smirk. "Of course, Captain." They moved to a side stage where a series of body cam clips, real and simulated, were cued. Henderson was asked to narrate his decision-making process, why he initiated stops, how he assessed threats, and when he chose to escalate. At first, he played the part. Calm. Professional. But then came the final clip. It was him, pulling over Danielle Carter on that humid evening weeks earlier. The crowd recognized the footage immediately. Gasps filled the room. "Officer Henderson," Danielle said evenly, "walk us through this stop." He hesitated. "Routine ID check. Was there probable cause?" I believe she matched a description, which was, suspicious behavior. Laughter. sharp, bitter, rippled through the audience. Danielle didn't move, didn't blink. Suspicious behavior, she repeated. Such as walking home from work in a suit? Henderson's voice faltered. I was following protocol. No, Danielle said softly. You were following prejudice, the room erupted. Shouts of shame and accountability now filled the air. Reporters swarmed closer. City officials exchanged alarmed glances. But Danielle wasn't done. Officer Henderson, she continued, voice steady as steel, you've been involved in 9 separate complaints alleging racial bias, each one dismissed. Yet our independent audit found patterns that cannot be ignored. She tapped her folder. You stopped black drivers at 5 times the precinct average. You escalated force against black suspects at a rate 3 times higher than against white suspects. And in one case, documented and buried, you falsified a report to justify an unlawful stop. Henderson surged to his feet. This is a witch hunt. No, Danielle replied, stepping closer. This is justice. Security moved forward as the crowd's energy surged. Council members leaned into microphones, demanding immediate suspension. The police chief, pale and silent, whispered to a deputy. For the first time, Henderson looked around and saw no allies. No one would meet his eyes. No one spoke in his defense. His confidence, the swagger that had shielded him for decades, was gone. Captain Carter, a reporter shouted. What happens now? Danielle drew a deep breath. The Department of Internal Affairs will reopen every complaint, and Officer Henderson will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. It was over, but Danielle wasn't finished. One more thing, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. This isn't just about one officer. This is about a culture that allowed this behavior to flourish unchecked. Every commander who buried a complaint, every supervisor who looked the other way, they are complicit. And under my command, they will be held accountable too. The silence that followed wasn't stunned anymore. It was reverent, and then a voice from the back. We stand with you, Captain. Applause. First scattered, then growing, rolling through the room like a wave. Maria stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes, and stood beside Danielle. One by one, other officers, including some who had doubted her, joined them. Henderson, still frozen in place, stared as his world crumbled, everything he had built on arrogance, on prejudice, on unchecked power, gone. And the person he had tried to humiliate now stood above him, not as a victim, but as a leader who had changed the game. As Henderson was escorted out of the hall, cameras followed. Questions rained down. Do you have anything to say? Do you regret your actions? He said nothing. For the first time in his career, words, his favorite weapon, failed him. Danielle watched from the stage, her expression unreadable. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was something more profound. The weight of a long-overdue reckoning settling on a city that could no longer pretend. And as the applause swelled again, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The storm didn't end with the town hall. In some ways, it was only beginning. The next morning, every major news outlet in the country carried the story. Headlines splashed across screens. Officer accused of racial bias. Exposed by his own captain, Atlanta precinct faces. Reckoning after explosive reveal, from humiliation to justice. Black woman captain sparks police overhaul. Clips of the confrontation dominated social media. Henderson stammering. Danielle's piercing questions, the crowd's roar. Millions watched, shared, and debated. And for the first time in decades, the conversation wasn't about a single bad cop. It was about the entire system. Inside the department, the fallout was immediate. Henderson was placed on administrative leave within 24 hours. A week later, an internal investigation expanded into a full-scale federal civil rights probe. Former commanders were subpoenaed. Files once thought buried were unearthed. And one by one, officers who had evaded accountability for years were suddenly facing consequences. Some resigned quietly. Others fought back, calling the reforms a witch hunt. But the tide had turned. The city was watching. The country was watching. And Danielle Carter was no longer just a captain. She was a catalyst. The changes started small but were visible. Training programs shifted from checkbox exercises to immersive, scenario-based workshops that confronted officers with their biases. Recruitment practices were overhauled to prioritize community engagement and cultural competency. And perhaps most importantly, the silence broke. Officers who had once kept their heads down, afraid to speak out, scared to challenge the status quo, began to voice concerns. A Latina patrol officer filed a complaint against a sergeant who had harassed her for years. 2 rookies reported discriminatory stop patterns in their unit, and for the first time, those complaints were investigated. Seriously, transparently, fairly. Even those who had opposed Danielle's reforms started to shift. One veteran officer who had openly mocked her early proposals approached her after a briefing. "I was wrong," he said. "I see it now." Danielle didn't gloat. She nodded. "Then help me fix it." Outside the department, the impact was even more profound. Community trust, once fractured beyond repair, began to heal. Neighborhood meetings that used to erupt in anger turned into collaborative discussions. Activists who had once demanded the department's dismantling were now partnering with it to build new initiatives. One evening, Danielle attended a youth outreach event in a neighborhood long alienated from police. As she stepped onto the community center stage, the applause caught her off guard. "Thank you," a mother said, tears in her eyes. "For the first time, I feel like my son's life matters to the people sworn to protect it." Danielle smiled softly. "It always did," she said. "Now it's time our system reflected that." As for Mark Henderson, the man who had once strutted through the precinct with untouchable arrogance, his world shrank quickly. The investigation uncovered falsified reports, manipulated evidence, and a pattern of discriminatory stops so egregious that it made national headlines. Civil rights lawsuits piled up. He was stripped of his badge and forced into early retirement pending potential criminal charges. Reporters camped outside his home. Former colleagues distanced themselves. And the man who once relished power over others now avoided eye contact at grocery stores. But the most significant punishment was internal. Henderson was forced to confront a truth he had spent decades denying, that his authority had never been strong. It had been fear, weaponized and unchecked. And when that fear was stripped away, there was nothing left but regret. Weeks turned into months, and the dust began to settle. Danielle's reforms were now department policy. Complaints were dropping. Trust metrics were climbing. And for the first time in her career, she felt like the badge on her chest meant what it was supposed to. Yet she knew this was not the end. Prejudice didn't vanish with one scandal. Racism didn't dissolve with one firing. This was just the beginning of a more protracted fight, one that would require vigilance, courage, and relentless accountability. In an interview with a national news anchor, she put it plainly. "This isn't about heroes or villains," she said. "It's about systems. Systems don't change because we want them to. They change because we demand it, fight for it, and refuse to accept anything less." The anchor leaned forward. "And what would you say to others, especially women of color, who feel powerless to change those systems?" Danielle smiled. "Power isn't given, it's taken, one act of courage at a time." Late one evening, long after most officers had gone home, Danielle walked through the quiet precinct halls. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint. They were renovating the community liaison office, expanding it into a whole department. She paused by a display case near the entrance, a wall of commendations and portraits of past captains. Most were white men in crisp uniforms, their eyes stern and confident. And now, in the center of them all, hung a new photo. Hers, Danielle Carter. Captain, reformer, leader. She stood there for a long moment, absorbing the weight of it. Not as a victory, but as a promise. A promise to the little girl who once watched her father humiliated on the side of the road. A promise to every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, and a promise to herself that this fight would never stop here. In the end, this story was never just about one officer's arrogance or one woman's rise. It was about something far larger, a truth as uncomfortable as it is undeniable. Power without accountability becomes cruelty. And cruelty, when left unchecked, becomes the system itself. Danielle Carter didn't win because she humiliated Mark Henderson. She won because she refused to let humiliation define her. She turned indignity into action, action into change, and change into a blueprint for something bigger. This system could finally live up to the ideals it claimed to represent. And yet her story is not unique. Somewhere right now, another woman of color is being underestimated. Another voice is being silenced. Another person is being told, subtly or directly, to know their place. But here's the truth. The people who try to put you in a box are often terrified of what happens when you step out of it. Danielle's greatest revenge wasn't Henderson's downfall. It was the rise of every person who saw her and realized they could fight back, too. So, I'll leave you with this question. If this happened in your workplace, your school, or your neighborhood, would you stay silent or would you stand taller? Tell us in the comments, because real change doesn't start in courtrooms or news headlines. It starts with conversations like this, with people like you refusing to look away. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to injustice is, "Not anymore."